Welcome to Talk to Brazil with Tom Reaoch, the business connector to business in Brazil. Welcome to Talk to Brazil podcast, the business connection. It's the world's first English language internet program about business in Brazil, and we've been on the air since June 2000. I'm Tom Reaoch, an American living in Brazil, and here I'm known as the king of networking and talking from my studio in Campinas, São Paulo. Today's guest is Alexander Willy. He's the managing partner at Willy Group in São Paulo, Brazil. Willy Group is an innovative international consultancy, a group which focuses on generating bottom-line results for clients. It's a reference in its segment where results are fast, measurable, and long-lasting. Fast because clients perceive results in 30 to 90 days. So with that, Alexander, thank you and welcome to Talk to Brazil.
Thank you very much. Good morning to everyone.
Talking about fast results, normally Brazil isn't known as being fast, right?
You bet.
And you've been in. How long have you been in business? Tell our listeners a little bit about business starting up Brazil. And basically, our audience is a foreign composition, and for foreigners to understand Brazil, sometimes it's complex and sometimes it's not fast, right?
Yeah, you bet. Anyway, we've been in business for 19 years now. We have offices in Brazil, Argentina, Peru, Mexico, and Chile. Currently in Brazil, we are counting with 89 consultants and 62 large companies being attended with our services. We started back in 2001, focusing on cost reduction on SG&A, overhead, indirect costs. So we have in our site over 100 cases in that line. Therefore, you can see there's a lot of room and opportunity for cost reduction. Mm-hmm. We also have among those consultants 17 experts on tax, basically to avoid and or basically get taxes that one has paid more than they should. Right. Also an opportunity and a pitfall that companies might face coming into Brazil. And we have also 9 Japanese fellows, all experts. Our head is over 51 years, not of age, but of expertise in Brazil. He was tag number 2 on Toyota in Brazil. So we basically have a large group of, I call baldies and white hairs with a lot of experience in generating bottom line results for our clients.
Well, it's actually need that because to follow what you mentioned in terms of cost reduction, indirect costs in Brazil, and again to our foreign audience, there's a lot of depth. There's always been historically a lot of change. Taxes are complex and hard to understand. The legal part of Brazil is also complex and hard to understand. But from a foreign company's aspect in Brazil, and there have been and there still are many changes, to understand those changes over time is also complex. And for many times what I've seen in foreign companies, a CEO or the manager comes, spends 2 years, 3 years, and then is transferred to another place. And many times that professional coming to Brazil, he really doesn't understand the full history of what happens from a tax standpoint. Is that part of your competency to do the digging and find out the opportunities that are there?
Yeah, you bet. And as you said, on the C-level in Brazil, I don't know why, but there is an average of precisely 3 years that a CFO and a CEO kind of stays in the company. So right. I always say that the first year the guy is basically trying to understand and learn the company. Second one, he's already trying to implement what he learned. On the third year, he's already looking for his other job. So right. Everything that he learned, he's carrying with him. Right. So on our side, as a consultancy, I must say, is an opportunity and many things to be done. As you mentioned, in Brazil, tax, we have over 90 types of tax within federal, state, and municipal taxes, contributions, duties. So there's a lot of room for one to, let's say, pay more than they should. And also, on the opposite side, opportunities for one to be more competitive and avoid those burdens. Tax in Brazil can go from 15.26% over to 34% of your sales. So there are companies that don't have a gross margin of 6 to 8%. So
right.
If you're managing to reduce 8, 9, 10 points on this, could make a hell of a difference on your bottom line result.
Well, we don't want to scare anybody away from coming and doing business in Brazil, because your history has also been in that. And I see, as a member of the American Chamber here, you've already written some time ago a book about doing business in Brazil and offering advice to that. Brazil's still a good place to come to and do business, isn't it?
It's a great place. The only thing, is, the book that I wrote was back in 1996, so a lot has been developed and changed, most of them for the good, but still, if you compare ourselves to for instance, New Zealand, of course, they are the benchmark on this. It will take a half a mandate to open a company, as in São Paulo, it will take around about or close to 14 mandates, as in Latin America, 28. So it can be a little bit of a burden to open a company, but if you structure it well and check everything from landmarks and from registering electricity, dealing with construction permits, so on and so forth, can make you, let's say, faster, and therefore you'll be able to generate, let's say, a healthier bottom line to your company.
But taking the point you made about New Zealand, and obviously it could be faster, but in Brazil we're talking about a market of over 200 million people. If we just look at the state of São Paulo, the city of São Paulo, the state of São Paulo of like 40 million. Campinas, where I live, the greater region, is over 3 million inhabitants. So it obviously is worth taking the time to establish yourself, because the market is so large.
Yes, as you said, it's a huge market. I would say probably within or just close to China and India. I would say those are the three main focuses and targets that any company should be looking in the world to put some money and invest. But as I say, being such a continental large company also raises all the logistics that you have to take care of. And back to logistics, everything logistics is also attached to tax. As I mentioned, it's important to mention, because not all of the other countries have federal, state, and municipal, let's say, different laws and rules.
Right.
So one should be very, very careful. I remember a case of a large oil and gas company that was operating down in Rio Grande do Sul. That's the very tip south of Brazil, and basically decided to move towards the center. And in terms of logistics, were perfect. The only problem is that from 9% tax on ICMS, which is a municipal tax, they went to 18. So doubling that, and nobody took care of that, basically put the whole distribution center into the ground, meaning it was worthless, and they did it, unfortunately.
Well, that's an interesting point to make. And for companies thinking of coming to Brazil, you do need to plan and think before you establish where you want to be. Because what I've seen historically in my time here, the general progression is somebody from the commercial side comes and sees 200 million people, and they think it's a great market. Then somebody comes from the logistics side, says, well, how are we going to supply this market? Then you get some marketing people who show up, and not necessarily the people from the tax side come at the same time. And so companies are established without that thought process that you just mentioned.
Yeah, and taking to that also independently, if you're working with an industry focus or service focus, you also have to think of your labor force. And I always say quality and complexity. Quality, depending if you are towards the center of São Paulo, Rio, as you said, mentioned Campinas is a huge tech center, very much developing. You get a very good labor force in terms of quality, but also you have to realize in terms of complexity, back to taxes on aid social, labor lawsuits, contingencies. So you have to basically work in several aspects in order to fulfill what you want. And depending on the one leading let's say the NewCo, that's somehow they say it's a NewCo company in Brazil coming to the name of the project. that most of the companies name it.
Right.
Depending if it's a more commercial side, as you said, they're looking for sales. If it's a more financial, they will look for the taxes and labors and all those costs related to it. So anyway, making a long story short, you should look all those aspects. And again, they can be a huge point in terms of opportunity or problems.
Right. Well, on to the opportunity side, you mentioned infrastructure and the relationship between states and areas in Brazil. One of the deficiencies that Brazil has had is the physical infrastructure of going from point A to point B or going throughout the country. And more recently, there is a drive in the privatization of companies, the privatization of state-run companies. And that focus is on highways, railways, ports, airports. So there will be and is a lot of movement in that sense of privatization. So that's the plus side right now.
You bet. I mean, from railroads to, let's say, to being able to control the roads but the funny is that, again, looking on the complexity side, one will look for, let's say, as you said, bringing things from over 1,000 kilometers from the tip south of São Paulo, of Brazil, from Rio Grande do Sul, Porto Alegre, back to São Paulo. Mm-hmm. That's over 100 kilometers. But once he comes to our ring road, just like in England, he'll have to basically park his truck outside and make some sort of a picking in order to deliver it to inside. Right. Another case of a company that was using the regular, let's say, background that they knew was DHL and FedEx, so on and so forth. They were paying something like 43 reais per package to be delivered inside São Paulo. We changed now to Logi, which is a new tech company working with the motoboys, as we call. Right. For the ones that are not familiar, he's basically delivering with motorcycles. In terms of service level agreements, from 8 hours, we dropped it to 15 minutes, and from 45 reais to 8 reais. Right. So it's a huge difference in terms of service, and you bet in terms of money. They had over 6,000 deliveries on a monthly basis, so you can make some sort of a counting how much that can result in your bottom line at the end of the day.
Well, I've even seen other persons that I've interviewed are talking about São Paulo, the city of São Paulo, the complexity of logistics. And you talked about the motorcycles. There's also bicycle delivery. And there are companies now opening up the hand delivery so that people will be able to be part of a logistics system where things will be delivered, will be picked up by hand, taken on foot, and delivered by hand. So getting back to really one-on-one.
As you say, it's a brave new world here in Brazil, and you can have many opportunities. Just focus on logistics or any sort of, let's say, needs, and we need a lot in Brazil. So if you're an expert on your local country in any sort of aspects, just come down to Brazil, try to fulfill, see if it's you're more competitive than the ones already operating here, and just do it. As you said, we have over 200 million of mouths eager to eat, eager to do, eager to consume. So definitely, tough place to work if you're not prepared, but if you are, huge opportunities.
Well, I think it's fair to say I don't think there are any easy places to work in the world anymore. So you have to go where the opportunities and understand how to take advantage of those opportunities. One point I want to ask, because obviously the last 3 years this has been in evidence, this has been on the mind of most foreign companies thinking of coming to Brazil, and one of the reasons that many of them stopped. You mentioned bureaucracy, and you've talked about that, but corruption. Corruption has been on the headlines. There have been a number of cases. It still hasn't gotten off the headlines. But what do you feel, obviously, looking forward? Are things better?
I mean, they are much, much better. Things that, again, our minds try to think on the long term, but on a very, very short-term basis, 3 to 5 years. I mean, we improved, but a big deal, meaning all these Lava Jatos, let's say the state companies, and even the private held ones the largest companies in Brazil were facing, let's say, bribes and payments done in order to do business. Also something that one say that was part of doing business in Brazil. It was kind of, I would say, regular.
Right.
Today is the opposite, meaning it's so much controlled that one of my clients was also involved in this particular problems. And funny enough, we used to be able to make a meeting with only one person. Today, by their bylaws, the minimum possible persons in a meeting representing the company is at least two.
Right.
And they are monitoring, recording. So I think it's already too much. We don't have this even in the more developed places. But that helps something that was very tough in Brazil, which is enforcing contracts.
Right.
That's something that, let's say, was a weak point in Brazil, but currently, if you prepare, and that's my recommendation, prepare very well thought-through and developed contracts so you can enforce it, because this was one of the, let's say, more on the financial aspect of it, something that was very costly in Brazil. So, yeah, the bureaucracy and corruption would, let's say, affect all the points that we mentioned: labor, export, financial costs, paying taxes, infrastructure, so on and so forth. But it has improved a lot.
Well, that's a point. Even, not too many years ago, if you used the word compliance, many people didn't even understand what it meant. So I think that's taken on a new dimension. I think it's, and for multinational, international companies, that's a high point. But back to what you do, looking into the past and back to your white-haired consultants, since there is a lot of history, it needs to be examined to see where the cost reductions are.
Yeah, most of my say companies, they have what I call the black belts, the Six Sigma, the, let's say, cost improvement experts. And nevertheless, and that's again why we hire the Bodis and the white hats, is they are very much known, and they know exactly where to look. They won't be missing and losing time on things that are not value-added.
Right.
So, for instance, we got a company that, among my clients, also one of the largest aviation-driven companies, and they had just bought another one, the second largest player in the market. They had those big four companies of evaluating, checking, and it was funny because the CFO said he would cut his head off if my experts would find any sort of credits. In 70 days, we managed to find 180 million reais. So that's a huge amount of money. And the main reason for that, again, the big four companies, they are excellent, but usually looking, as you mentioned, for compliancy, auditing, and the main word is contingency. Right. Nevertheless, they are not experts on going for the credits. Therefore, you have to get seasoned people that are experts on the credit side.
Right.
So basically, most of the companies here have their task force, their groups looking for opportunities. But that's something that we also managed to develop, that before we even start any sort of project in Brazil, we'll get to the group that is responsible for for particular categories, sign it up and say, hey, is there anything being done here? No. So by definition, we have to be bringing real value added to the company. Therefore, we have companies that in average stays over 9 years with us. So we are very happy with, let's say, the results that we have been bringing. Clients are happy and developing, doing very, very good business in Brazil.
Well, another thing we mentioned, even in the coming here to establish yourself in business, but what is happening and has happened over the last several years in a more striking manner are the numbers of joint ventures and mergers. And I think that we were talking about the changes of CFOs and CEOs. Just that fact of these mergings, you bring 2 or maybe 3 companies together and then coming out as a third company. You have each one of the previous individual companies have their history.
As you said, I mean, those usually when you buy a company and or you make 2 to become 1 or 3 or so on and so forth, We have here Willy Invest, which is one of our branches. We admin over $2 billion in Brazil. So basically, everybody's also eager to come. They're just waiting and looking for, let's say, particular very interesting projects. So there's a lot of money, let's say, just sitting down and waiting to see what's going to happen with new and more developed rules on taxes and simplification of the bureaucracy, so on and so forth. But as you said, putting two companies or three companies together, by definition, they are not equal. So the one that was not, let's say, as mature as the other one or two has a huge amount of synergies and opportunities. And I've seen companies that were paid off just with the credits that they were able to collect.
Right.
So if well done and well prepared and analyzed, one can make a payoff in months of the entire amount that they invest in a particular company.
And what you're saying, really, there's money in the closet. There's money in the drawer, in a way of saying that. You just have to find out and readjust different regulations and laws and understanding those and applying them, obviously, in a legal, above-the-table way. And getting what the credits are back, and that comes right to the bottom line.
Yeah, we work for several of, let's say, the investment groups here in Brazil, like Pátria, Rio Bravo, so on and so forth. And for instance, they elected one particular company, the largest one, on managing payroll. As I said, payroll is something very complex in Brazil. There's a international big player here. And for instance, their system is registered, set wrongly. So every time you pay your payroll, you're paying more than you should. So they have something like over 30 companies today that are being managed. We went one by one, and 100% of them were using this particular company and paying more than they should.
And really overpaying, right? It's all legal. Overpaying.
That's the thing. And it's not something that you say, I'm going to, let's say, be subject or use a flaw in the law. No, just applying the single and plain rule. And the thing is, you have to look in very many aspects: where the company is located, what sort of union is related to that particular person that is working that particular company, the turnaround, so on and so forth. I say it's a system prone for errors and by definition prone for mistakes and on the opposite side, opportunities.
Or even to readjust, because recently we've had some very interesting and important labor regulation changes in the law. So really to take what was and updating that and looking at it again could generate cost reduction.
You bet. It was a huge, let's say, change in Brazil. By definition, you are never always, let's say, happy with the end result, meaning always could be better. But it did change. It did simplify. For instance, in the past, if your former employee would enter with a labor lawsuit against you, regardless if he was right or wrong, you would have the cost of the lawyer, so on and so forth, to pay, to just to defend yourself, because the guy didn't have any sort of quote-unquote responsibility over his labor lawsuit. Now it's different. If he's requesting something and he is wrong, he will have to pay the penalty for it. So I think from 1 or 2 years, the number of labor lawsuits reduced by 80%. So again, it was a costly thing in Brazil, but now it's a huge opportunity. Meaning, be alert, do it well, and you have, by definition, 80% less problems if you do it right.
Well, so being alert, but also being with professionals and persons, companies like your own that have, as we say, boots on the ground and understand over these years that you've been in existence, almost 20 years, of continually updating and adjusting to change. And change will continue to happen. It's never over. So I think that's an important aspect. But the bottom line is Brazil still is an attraction point for investment, for growth, and for opportunity.
Among the five places that we work in Latin America, by definition, Brazil is the most attractive, large, and prone to generate good results. So yes, I would definitely say, well, come to Brazil, check your opportunities, regardless. I mean, with all this new tech, let's say, side that is affecting all the companies, even if we say, oh, I'm going to apply, let's say, more tech to my company, there's a particular law, again, that it was developed to precisely make things go fast in Brazil, whereas you get 20% deduction if you prove that that particular thing that you develop, service, new procedure, tech-driven, was done in Brazil and increase your productivity. So the main rule is just be sure that you're doing it right. You get a 20% rebate on 100% that you are investing.
Right.
So I know a company that produced plastic, that came into the plastics business. They almost paid his entire new facility just with the credit that he managed to get.
And that's almost a Christmas present, birthday present, a present, right?
Yeah, especially because in Brazil, as everybody knows, the financial costs are still high compared to any other place in the world. We dropped from 18 to 20% on a year basis to around about 5%. But still, on a true real basis, we get to 2 or 3% cost that we didn't used to have in the past. So again, something that one should be looking at is the financial aspects of evaluations, credit risks that one can find opportunities in Brazil.
Well, I think that's the way we're going to wrap this up and help our listeners that in Brazil, cost, or the cost of Brazil or Brazil cost, is not one thing. Brazil cost is a compendium of a number of things that all have to be looked at, and there could be savings in each one of those portions.
Yep. Again, I'll come back to something that was basically neglected by the market, but I think is one of the most important assets nowadays. The gray hairs and the boldies, the ones with a lot of expertise that can come in on a fast but a very solid way, help you on improve your bottom line results.
Very good. Well, Alex, I want to thank you for sharing your time with our listeners. We're coming to the end of our program, and would like to invite our listeners to find more about Willy Group at your site, which is Willy Group, and that's WILLYGROUP.com.br. And find more about Alexander Willy, and it's ALEXANDER WILLY. You could find him on LinkedIn. Is that the best way, Alexander?
You bet. Thank you very much, and always here if you want another chit-chat.
Thank you. We'll be back in touch. Thanks again.
Bye-bye.
And for our audience, I'd like to thank you and our sponsors, Focus MI Market Intelligence. Focus MI specializes in market research for the Brazilian agricultural market. More about them on their site, focusmi.com. And also invite you to visit our website, which is talktobrazil.com. That's TALK, 2, BRAZIL.com. There you'll find our previous shows of Talk to Brazil. So remember, when you talk to Tom, you talk to Brazil and the world. Goodbye, and thanks for listening. Thanks for listening to Tom Reaoch on Talk to Brazil, the business connector to Brazil.